Margaret Ellis had turned 72 last spring, though she still moved with the quiet purpose of a woman who had never quite learned how to slow down. She lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment on the third floor of an old brick building in the quiet suburb of Elmwood Heights, the same town where she had raised her only child, Daniel. The rent was affordable on her Social Security and the small pension from 35 years as a school cafeteria manager. She kept the lights low, the heat at 68, and the grocery list short. Fresh produce when it was on sale, store brand everything else. Every dollar had a job. Daniel, now 38, worked as an accountant for a mid-sized firm downtown. He had married Lila 4 years earlier in a small backyard ceremony that Margaret had paid for out of her savings. Lila was beautiful in a polished way, long dark hair, perfect nails, always smelling faintly of expensive vanilla perfume. From the start, she had been warm to Margaret, calling her mom almost immediately, hugging her a little too tightly at family gatherings. Margaret had wanted to believe the affection was genuine. But over the past 2 years, the calls had started. First, it was small things. "The car needs new tires, Mom, and we're a little short this month." Then bigger. "The landlord raised the rent again. Daniel's working overtime, but it's not enough." Later still, Lila's mom had another doctor's appointment. The copay was brutal. Margaret never said no. She transferred what she could from her checking account, sometimes dipping into the emergency fund she kept in a coffee can under the sink. She told herself it was what family did. Daniel was her boy, Lila was his wife. Their struggles were her struggles. That Saturday morning in mid-October, the sky was the color of old pewter. Margaret needed to pick up a few things for dinner. She had invited Daniel and Lila over for pot roast, her way of making sure they ate something home-cooked instead of takeout. She counted out $47 in crumpled bills and coins, tucked them into her worn leather purse, and walked the 8 blocks to Harper's Market, the neighborhood grocery that had been there since the 1970s. The store smelled of wet cardboard and baking bread. Margaret selected a small chuck roast, potatoes, carrots, a loaf of day-old bread to save $1. At the register, she placed everything on the belt and waited behind a young mother juggling a toddler and an overflowing cart. The cashier was Mr. Harlan, a man in his late 50s with thinning gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses that slid down his nose. He had worked at Harper's for decades. Margaret knew him by sight, though they had never exchanged more than polite small talk. Today, he rang up her items slowly, almost thoughtfully. When the total came to $38.74, Margaret opened her purse and began counting out the bills. She placed a 20, then a 10, then 5s and 1s, smoothing each one carefully. As she counted the last coins for the change, Mr. Harlan leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Ellis." His voice was low, meant only for her. She looked up, surprised he knew her name. He glanced around, no one else was close, then spoke again, quieter still. "You're Daniel's mother, right? The one who married Lila?" Margaret nodded, a flicker of unease stirring in her chest. "Yes?" He hesitated, fingers hovering over the register keys. "I probably shouldn't say anything. It's not my place, but I've seen things." Margaret's hand stilled on the current. "Lila comes in here 3-4 times a week, not with the basics, premium stuff. Organic salmon, those little fancy cheeses, bottles of wine that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. She pays cash every time, crisp hundreds. Never a coupon, never a second thought." Margaret felt the air leave her lungs slowly. And last month, she was in with her sister. They bought 2 of those big gift baskets, the ones we keep up front for holidays, over $100 each, laughing the whole time, talking about how they were treating themselves because life's too short. He paused, eyes meeting hers with something like apology. "I know they've been asking you and your son for help. I've overheard Lila on the phone in the aisle once or twice, saying how tight things are, how the bills are piling up. But what I'm seeing doesn't match what I'm hearing." Margaret's hand tightened around the counter edge. The receipt printer whirred, spitting out her slip. Mr. Harlan slid it across with her change. "He just thought you should know," he said softly. "My own sister went through something similar with her ex, gave everything she had until there was nothing left. I wish someone had told her sooner." Margaret managed a small "thank you," her voice barely audible. She took the bags, turned, and walked out of the store on legs that felt wooden. Outside, the cold air hit her face like a slap. She stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, bags heavy in her hands, mind spinning. Daniel and Lila lived 20 minutes away in a rented townhouse. Margaret had never visited unannounced. They always said weekends were busy. But today, the doubt Mr. Harlan had planted refused to stay quiet. She set the bags down on a bench near the bus stop, pulled out her phone and texted Daniel, "Running a little late, picking up a few extras, be there soon." Then she walked back towards the store, but turned left instead, toward the alley that ran behind the building. There was a low brick wall there, partially hidden by a row of dumpsters. She positioned herself behind it, heart thudding uncomfortably. If this was nothing, if Mr. Harlan was mistaken, she would feel foolish but relieved. If it wasn't, 15 minutes passed, 20. Then she saw her. Lila stepped out of the automatic doors, carrying 2 large paper bags with the Harper's logo. She wore a cream-colored coat Margaret had never seen before, tailored, expensive-looking. Her boots were new, too, black leather with a low heel that clicked on the pavement. Behind her came her younger sister, Tessa, laughing at something on her phone. They walked to a silver SUV parked in the premium spots near the entrance, the kind with leather seats and tinted windows. Margaret recognized it. Daniel had mentioned they had upgraded last year when the old sedan finally died, but he had said it was used, a necessity. Lila opened the back hatch. She placed the bags carefully, then pulled out her phone and snapped a photo of the groceries, probably for social media, Margaret thought with a sudden sour taste. Tessa climbed into the passenger seat. Lila got behind the wheel, started the engine, and pulled out smoothly. Margaret stayed hidden until the SUV disappeared around the corner. Then she straightened, knees aching from crouching, and began the walk home. The pot roast dinner that evening was quiet. Daniel arrived first, looking tired, tie loosened. Lila followed 10 minutes later, breezy and smiling, carrying a bottle of red wine as a thank you. Margaret noticed the label, something French, something she had seen priced at $32 at the liquor store down the street. They ate. Daniel talked about work. Lila talked about a new yoga class she had started. Margaret listened, nodding, asking questions, all while the words Mr. Harlan had spoken looped in her head like a recording stuck on repeat. After dessert, store-bought apple pie, because she hadn't had the energy to bake, Lila excused herself to the bathroom. Daniel leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. "Mom, I hate to ask again, but the heating bill came in high this month. Lila's been sick, doctor's visits. If you could spot us a couple hundred until payday?" Margaret looked at her son. The same soft brown eyes she had seen every day since he was born, the same hopeful, earnest expression. She thought of the salmon, the wine, the new coat. She thought of her coffee can under the sink, lighter every month. "I can't this time, Daniel," she said. Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled under the table. "I'm sorry. Things are tight here, too." He blinked, surprised. "Oh, okay. I understand." Lila returned, smile still in place. "Everything all right?" Daniel shrugged. "Just money stuff. We'll figure it out." Lila's eyes flicked to Margaret for a fraction of a second. Something sharp there, quickly hidden. "Of course we will. Thanks anyway, Mom." They left shortly after. Margaret stood at the window and watched their taillights disappear down the street. The next morning, she called her old friend Evelyn, who worked part-time at the county records office. Evelyn owed Margaret a favor from years ago when Margaret had helped her through a rough divorce. "Can you look something up for me?" Margaret asked, discreetly. Evelyn did. 2 days later, she called back. "The townhouse they're renting, lease is in Lila's name only, but there's a second property listed under her maiden name, a condo in the new development off Route 9, bought 18 months ago, mortgage current, no signs of hardship." Margaret thanked her and hung up. She spent the rest of the week thinking, remembering. The times Lila had cried on the phone about barely making rent, the times Daniel had worked weekends to cover unexpected expenses, the times Margaret had skipped her blood pressure medication refill to send an extra $50. On Friday, she drove herself to the new development off Route 9. It was one of those gated communities with manicured lawns and security cameras. She parked across the street at a coffee shop and waited. At 4:17 p.m., the silver SUV pulled in. Lila got out, hair tied back in a ponytail, carrying shopping bags from a boutique Margaret had only ever window shopped at. Tessa climbed into the passenger seat. Lila got behind the wheel, started the engine, and pulled out smoothly. Margaret stayed hidden until the SUV disappeared around the corner. Then she straightened, knees aching from crouching, and began the walk home. The pot roast dinner that evening was quiet. Daniel arrived first, looking tired, tie loosened. Lila followed 10 minutes later, breezy and smiling, carrying a bottle of red wine as a thank you. Margaret noticed the label, something French, something she had seen priced at $32 at the liquor store.